Chosen one, the person God has appointed for your life, is already moving toward the place where your paths will meet. This isn't a distant promise waiting somewhere beyond your reach. Something has already begun, even if your eyes haven't found the evidence yet. Maybe you've noticed it in those quiet mornings after prayer, or in the strange peace that settles over you when the names that once consumed your thoughts no longer carry the same weight. That quiet shift is often how God speaks before he changes what you can see. So hear this carefully. This message is not inviting you to search harder or chase what has not been revealed. It is not asking you to refresh your phone, reopen old conversations, or convince yourself that every unexpected encounter must be a sign. God has never needed your anxiety to fulfill his promises. Whoever he sends into your life will never require you to trade away the peace he has been patiently building within you. They may stretch your faith, but they will never ask you to become smaller just to be loved. That is why the season may be closer than it feels. Not because anyone can give you a date, and certainly not because loneliness has the power to hurry heaven. It is closer because the work began long before you noticed it. The first sign was never meant to be another person's face. It was meant to be the quiet transformation taking place inside you. Have you noticed that almost no longer satisfies you? Mixed signals no longer feel exciting. The chaos that once looked like passion now feels exhausting. Heaven rarely announces movement with noise. Sometimes the first miracle is simply that the old door stops calling your name. That change is preparation. It is the Father gently clearing space before the right person ever steps into it. For a long time you may have watched other people find love, support, friendship, and partnership, while quietly wondering why your own season seemed delayed. You smiled for them because you truly wanted their joy. Yet later, when the room became still, one question remained in your heart. What about me, God? Perhaps you never said it aloud because you felt guilty for asking. Perhaps you wrapped that ache in spiritual language and called it patience, while secretly wondering if somehow you had already missed your moment. But the Father never forgot you. There are prayers that would have become prisons if he had answered them on the day you first prayed. He has been protecting the meeting place because the wrong person arriving too early can leave wounds that make it harder to recognize what is truly meant for you. As this message unfolds, you will begin to understand why certain doors stayed closed, why hope survived even when your strength felt thin, and why your heart kept moving forward even after disappointment whispered that nothing would ever change. You will also begin to recognize something many people mistake. Not everything that stirs your emotions carries God's assignment. Some voices awaken old wounds. Others awaken the person God has been forming inside you. Those two experiences can feel surprisingly similar at first, which is why discernment matters so deeply in this season. There is one difference almost every chosen one eventually learns to recognize, and once you see it, you cannot unknow it. If this speaks to your spirit, type ready. Not because a comment creates the promise, but because sometimes speaking agreement helps your heart stop hiding from what God has been quietly preparing. Type ready if you sense that this is more than waiting for someone else. It is about becoming the version of yourself who can recognize what is holy without chasing what only feels familiar. You have sensed movement without being able to explain it. Nothing dramatic has happened. No message suddenly appeared. No one has arrived introducing themselves as the answer to your prayers. And yet, something inside you has become different. You wake up carrying a quieter heart. The conversations that once kept you awake at night feel strangely smaller now. The people who once had access to your deepest emotions no longer reach the same places within you. That stillness isn't emptiness. It is sacred preparation. Maybe you've noticed something else. The apology you would have sent 6 months ago, you never typed it. The message you almost chased, you quietly released. Attention no longer feels like proof that you matter. There was a season when one compliment could erase every warning sign, when a little warmth from the wrong person could make you imagine an entire future. But that version of you is fading, almost without you realizing it. Even when loneliness visits, It no longer gets to make your decisions for you. That is one of the clearest signs of growth. You are no longer explaining your worth to people who already chose not to see it. Something inside you has learned a new sentence. I can't go back there. Those words may sound simple, but they carry the weight of everything God has been teaching you. They mean your heart finally recognizes what peace feels like. They mean every closed door left behind more wisdom than disappointment. They mean the room you once begged to stay and no longer feels like home. Some days you still have questions. Some mornings you still wonder when, how, or through whom this promise will arrive. Yet underneath those questions, there's a quiet certainty that your life is being rearranged. And chosen one, this arrival may be far greater than the picture you've been holding. The person God sends may come as a husband or wife, but they may also arrive as a faithful friend, a mentor, a helper, someone carrying the key that opens the next chapter of your calling. Don't make the promise smaller than the one who gave it. Whatever role they carry, one thing will remain true. They will draw your heart closer to God instead of pulling it away. They will never ask you to stay confused so they can feel secure. They will never feed your wounds and call it destiny. Their presence will leave room for peace, for honesty, and for the person God has been restoring within you. Perhaps that is why you've begun losing your appetite for almost consistent, almost honest, almost available, almost committed. There was a time when you accepted those fragments because you feared that asking for clarity would leave you with nothing. Now something deeper has changed. You would rather protect the peace God has planted in your heart than return to a place where confusion had to pretend to be love. Now you've reached a place where peace means more than performance ever could. You would rather live with honest clarity than keep calling emotional chaos a connection. Waiting with God no longer feels as frightening as returning to something that leaves your spirit crowded and restless. That change didn't happen by accident. It is one of the quiet signs that your heart is entering what I would call the receiver season. This is the season where God is shaping more than your future. He is gently restoring the part of you that knows how to receive, recognize, and respond when something holy finally arrives. A wounded heart can mistake a blessing for a threat because pain has trained it to expect disappointment. A weary heart can push away peace simply because peace feels unfamiliar. And a lowly heart can hold so tightly to an imitation that it forgets what genuine love was always meant to feel like. That is why the Father has been slowing your steps. He has been teaching you that moving quickly is not the same as moving faithfully. He has been showing you that urgency often belongs to fear, while true direction usually grows in quiet places. Stay there for a moment and notice what your heart has been learning, because some lessons are too gentle to be heard while you're running. You have probably felt this change before you understood it. Around certain people, your body grows tense before your mind finds the words. Your chest feels heavy, your thoughts become scattered, and you find yourself working harder to hold together something that should never have required so much effort. That isn't weakness, and it isn't you being overly sensitive. Sometimes your spirit recognizes what your emotions are still trying to explain. You felt the opposite too. There are moments when an unexpected calm settles over an idea, a decision, or even a new direction. Nothing dramatic happens, yet something inside you quietly exhales. It feels as though life is unfolding without you having to force every outcome into place. God often lets peace become the first whisper of confirmation, long before visible evidence ever appears. This is part of the holy crossing. Long before two lives recognize one another, God can already be preparing both paths. While He is closing one door in your life, He may be healing fear in someone else's. While He is teaching you to release what no longer belongs, He may be removing distractions from the one who is also being prepared. So much of heaven's work happens in silence before anyone ever calls it a miracle. That is why this season cannot be measured only by what your eyes can see. Pay attention to what no longer fits your life. Pay attention to the conversations that suddenly feel too small, the habits that no longer satisfy you, and the strange peace that appeared after you finally let go of what once seemed impossible to release. Those quiet changes are often more revealing than dramatic signs. Some of you have noticed something that surprised even you. The person you once begged God to restore no longer occupies your thoughts the way they used to. You didn't force yourself to stop caring. One day you simply realized the grip had loosened. That wasn't bitterness growing in your heart. It was freedom quietly taking back ground that fear once occupied. Others have stopped checking who viewed the story, who sent the message, who remembered, who regretted, or who came back. That wasn't because you stopped loving. It happened because your need for constant reassurance no longer sits on the throne of your heart. You've also found yourself praying differently. Instead of handing God a specific name, you've started trusting Him with the whole story. That is surrender. That is the posture that leaves room for God to send the right person without asking them to become your savior. No person sent by God was ever meant to carry the place that belongs to the Father alone. They may bring encouragement, partnership, wisdom, or comfort into your life, but they cannot become the foundation of your identity. When someone is expected to heal wounds that only God can restore, even a beautiful relationship begins carrying a weight it was never designed to hold. This is where many people misunderstand the season they are in. They believe they are waiting for someone to arrive, when in reality they are waiting to finally feel worthy through another person's love. They long for someone who will erase every rejection, silence every fear, and finally prove they matter. But the person God sends will never be asked to build an identity that God has already been restoring inside you. They will meet the person you are becoming, not the version of you who disappears every time affection is offered. So ask yourself something gently. What has quietly changed inside me? What no longer controls my emotions the way it once did? What kind of treatment can I no longer convince myself to accept? What peace have I started protecting, even when protecting it meant walking away from people I thought I couldn't live without? Don't rush past those answers. They are evidence that something holy has already begun. Chosen one, you are closer than you realize. Not because you've discovered who the person is, but because you are becoming someone who no longer confuses being chosen by another person with already being chosen by God. And that leads to the question many hearts quietly carry. If everything has already begun moving, why can't you see it yet? Why does the promise feel so close in your spirit, while your hands still seem empty? The answer reaches deeper than disappointment, and once you understand it, this waiting season will stop looking like punishment and begin looking like protection. Your heart has needed more than the familiar phrase, "Delay is not denial." It has needed someone to acknowledge the nights when you smiled through conversations, celebrated everyone else's blessings, drove home in silence, and finally whispered to God, "What about me?" Perhaps you never admitted that question, because you felt ashamed for asking it. Perhaps you buried it beneath worship, work, or the belief that mature faith should never feel tired. But weary hearts still belong to God. There were evenings when you wondered whether you had already missed your moment. There were mornings when the silence felt personal, as though everyone else's life was moving forward while yours remained still. You questioned why the person God had prepared had not appeared, especially when He knew how long you had carried certain burdens alone. Yet your wounds could never tell you the whole story. Waiting is not always abandonment. Silence is not always rejection. Sometimes the Father protects the meeting place because timing matters just as much as the promise itself. The wrong person arriving too early can interrupt healing, and even the right person can be misunderstood if they meet a version of you that still believes love must be earned through survival. Think about who you were before this season quietly reshaped your heart. You loved deeply, but many times you left yourself behind in the process. You prayed for the right relationship while secretly believing you had to become easier, quieter, or smaller to keep the wrong one from leaving. You called it patience. You called it loyalty. Sometimes you even called it unconditional love. But beneath those beautiful words, fear was often asking you to negotiate away the honor God had always intended for you. The Father has never been preparing only one person. He has been preparing the meeting place where two restored lives can finally recognize what He has been shaping all along. The holy crossing is not just two paths meeting, but two hearts, arriving with enough truth to no longer confuse fear for love or loneliness for destiny. This is the quiet work heaven has been doing beneath everything you could see. What once felt like delay was often protection. God was not hiding the person from you. He was guarding the version of you who would meet them. There were doors that stayed closed because they belonged to an older identity, and people who left because they only knew the version of you that accepted less than what God intended. Even what felt like unanswered prayer was often mercy, protecting you from settling in a space too small for what was coming. When you begin to see it this way, waiting changes its meaning. It no longer feels like rejection, but like the Father shaping you away from fear and survival. Instead of asking when the person will come, your heart begins asking who you are becoming, because God has never stopped remembering you. That shift quietly replaces panic with peace, and brings you back to awareness that your life has never been still. Even in the waiting, something has been forming in you. Your heart is learning to receive without grasping, to hope without forcing, and to recognize what is holy without chasing what only feels familiar. Waiting was never empty. It was preparation, teaching you how to protect what God is building before it arrives. Chosen one, you are not forgotten. Not behind, not late. You are being led toward a meeting point already prepared in advance, and when the one God sends finally steps into your life, you will not need to sacrifice your peace to recognize them. If this speaks to you, type "I am not forgotten," and let it settle where silence once felt like abandonment. Before that arrival, an old echo may return one last time. A familiar pattern may resurface, not to confuse you, but to reveal how much you have changed. What once held your attention may knock again, and in that moment you will see whether you still respond from hunger or from healing. Now imagine a morning that feels closer than your fear allows. The room is quiet, light is soft, and before reaching for anything outside yourself, you realize you no longer need external attention to confirm your worth. There is a steadiness inside you that no longer depends on who responds or who stays. You are no longer measuring your value through messages or reactions. Instead, there is a grounded peace growing in you, one that comes from identity rooted in the Father. A person rooted like this no longer rushes toward proof. They trust what is already being aligned. That is what it means to be planted. The one who is starving reaches everywhere for certainty, but the one who is rooted recognizes that what belongs will arrive in its time. Peace may feel unfamiliar at first, but once it settles, chaos no longer feels like home. You begin to move differently. You speak without fear of loss behind your words. You protect your boundaries without apology. You stop rehearsing ways to be accepted because your worth is no longer negotiable. Then, when the person God has prepared begins to appear, something becomes clear. Instead of confusion, there is clarity. Instead of emotional instability, there is consistency. Their presence does not force you to decode hidden meanings or brace for rejection, and your heart slowly begins to relax. This is not because they are perfect, but because they carry order instead of chaos, honesty instead of distortion, and peace instead of instability. They do not replace your relationship with the Father. They reinforce it. They do not diminish you. They recognize what God has already been building in you. Peace will not answer every question at once, but it will remain steady as understanding unfolds. Even when the relationship stretches you, it will not pull you back into what God has already freed you from. That is how you will know. Take a moment to see that version of yourself. They are not desperate, not suspicious, not testing every blessing until it disappears. They are grounded, discerning, and able to receive without idolizing what they receive. because the one God sends is never meant to become your source. They may bring kindness, wisdom, or confirmation, but they remain a reflection of the source, not a replacement for it. You are not waiting to be rescued. You are entering a life where you can finally receive without losing yourself. Let that settle deeply. You are not becoming valuable. You already are. You are not becoming chosen. You already are the chosen one. The person God sends will not create your worth. Only recognize what He has already established within you. And that is why this season matters. Every closed door has refined your discernment. Every stretch of loneliness has loosened your attachment to what is temporary. Every ending has been teaching you to choose what is aligned over what only feels familiar. When that person finally enters your life, you won't meet them as someone starving to be chosen. You'll meet them as someone whose soul has learned where true nourishment comes from. A starving heart grabs at anything that feels like relief, but a healed heart receives what is given without losing itself. That changes everything. Hunger mistakes urgency for love, while healing notices character before chemistry, peace before excitement, and lasting fruit before powerful emotions. In time, a healed heart learns the difference between a holy crossing and a counterfeit echo. Chosen one, there is something many people never expect. Before the person God has prepared is fully recognized, an old echo often tries to speak one last time. It doesn't return to prove you've failed. It reveals how much your heart has truly changed. That is why slowing down matters. Hunger always wants immediate answers and tells you that anything familiar must be from God, but familiarity has never been the same as divine direction. Have you noticed that just as peace begins settling into your life, an old pattern suddenly reaches back toward you? Sometimes it's a person, sometimes a memory, and sometimes the version of yourself that once believed uncertainty was love. It rarely looks dangerous. More often it sounds exactly like what your wounded heart once longed to hear. After such a long season of waiting, it's easy to believe timing alone proves God's hand. Yet timing has never been enough. Sometimes what returns is an answer, and sometimes it is simply a quiet invitation to discover how much your discernment has grown. There are moments when something old comes back, not because God restored it, but because your heart is finally strong enough to recognize what once held it captive. Stay with that thought. Recognition is one of the deepest forms of healing. The counterfeit echo isn't always another person. Sometimes it's an old fantasy, a familiar ache, or a relationship that kept you anxious while making you feel wanted just enough to stay. Sometimes it's the belief that love must always feel uncertain before it can be real. Counterfeit connections sound like destiny, but leave confusion behind. They create excitement while quietly stealing your peace. They keep you performing, proving yourself, and wondering where you truly stand, offering just enough warmth to awaken the wound, but never enough honor to let your heart rest. You know this pattern because you've lived through it before. Someone awakened hope but disappeared when consistency mattered. Looking back, you may realize you weren't chasing them as much as you were chasing relief from loneliness. There was a version of you that called this chemistry, or even spiritual intensity. One conversation or one unexpected moment became the foundation for an entire future in your imagination. The ache inside you was louder than your discernment, but something has changed, not because you've become cold, but because the Father has been teaching your spirit a new language. You no longer mistake confusion for depth, or inconsistency for mystery. The one God sends will never need your uncertainty to keep you close. They won't hide behind spiritual language to avoid emotional honesty, and they will never shame your discernment because your questions reveal what isn't steady. Counterfeit connections often speak directly to your deepest desires while quietly feeding your oldest wounds. They may say everything you hope to hear and appear at what feels like the perfect moment, but words can impress for a moment. Fruit reveals character over time. So ask yourself gently, does this relationship draw me closer to the Father or closer to obsession? Does it leave my spirit clearer or my mind more restless? Can I ask honest questions without fearing I'll lose them? The answers usually arrive where peace has room to speak. The counterfeit echo urges you to chase. The one God sends allows your heart to become still enough to recognize what is real. Counterfeit love ignores your inner warning. Genuine love welcomes your need for peace. Chosen one, this isn't about becoming suspicious of people. It is about honoring what God has already healed inside you. Some people were never assigned to walk into this season with you, and that truth protects your future more than it disappoints your emotions. You can no longer confuse access with assignment. Every open door isn't a holy one. If your spirit has been quietly warning you, don't silence that voice simply because loneliness wants another answer. Think about the people who made basic kindness feel like something you had to earn. The ones who gave affection in small pieces until you became grateful for crumbs. You weren't foolish for loving deeply. You were searching for something sacred with a heart that was still learning how to recognize it. That is part of God's mercy in this season. He isn't only bringing the right people toward you, He is teaching you to stop reaching for what merely feels familiar, because familiar pain often feels safer than unfamiliar peace. Real stability is quieter than the emotional storms you once mistook for passion. Honest love may not overwhelm your nervous system, but it will steady your soul. The one God sends may arrive with calm instead of confusion, consistency instead of chaos, and quiet faithfulness instead of endless uncertainty. So let your discernment remain simple. If someone makes you hide your needs, pause. If asking for honesty fills you with guilt, pause. If staying connected requires you to betray the peace God has restored within you, release it with open hands. And if someone brings honesty, consistency, humility, and peace into your life, don't push it away simply because it feels different from the storms you've survived. Let the Father teach your heart the difference between what awakens an old wound and what gently restores your soul. One keeps you restless, the other finally lets you breathe. This is where your freedom begins to return. You no longer have to chase answers or prove your worth. Instead, watch the fruit, guard the peace God has planted within you, and refuse to mistake anxiety for divine guidance. If this speaks to your heart, type discernment. Let it become more than a comment. Let it become a prayer and a boundary. Chosen one, the person God is sending is already moving toward the place where your lives will meet. Before your eyes recognize what God has prepared, an old echo may try to convince you that nothing has changed. Let that old sound pass, and let your spirit become quiet enough to recognize the voice that carries peace instead of panic. This season has never been only about who is coming. It has always been about who is receiving. Many chosen ones sense when God is shifting something long before they can explain it. Yet sensing movement and being ready to receive it are not always the same. You can trust God deeply while your body still remembers what happened the last time you trusted the wrong person. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Sometimes your spirit is ready while the places inside you that learned survival are still catching up. Arrival has never been only about the one God sends. It is also about the condition of the heart that receives the gift, like trying to hear a clear message in a noisy room. The problem is not the message, it is everything surrounding it. Old pain can make peace feel unfamiliar even when God is already bringing it near. That is why this is the receiver season. The Father is not only arranging what is coming toward you, He is restoring the part of you that knows how to recognize it. Maybe you've already noticed it. Conversations that once felt comforting now leave your spirit unsettled, and the quiet warning inside you is becoming impossible to ignore. That isn't punishment. It is refinement. God is teaching your heart to stop calling confusion normal and helping you recognize the difference between someone who only wants access and someone who carries the character to walk beside you. Desire alone won't be enough when the right person arrives. Your heart will need peace, and your spirit will need discernment. Many faithful people know this struggle. They pray, they worship, and they sincerely want to trust God. Yet when love or kindness finally appears, something inside them hesitates. They aren't resisting God. They're carrying the weight of years spent surviving. So consider this for a moment. What if the promise has been closer than you realized, but your heart simply needed time to stop expecting every good thing to disappear? Some of what you called waiting may have been mercy. Some of what felt like delay may have been God preparing your heart to receive something sacred. The Father has been restoring more than your circumstances. He has been healing the part of you that once accepted crumbs because consistency felt impossible. Slowly your desires have changed. The people who once controlled your emotions no longer have the same power, and lasting fruit matters more than beautiful words. Don't despise the quiet season. The quiet has been clearing away the noise, so your spirit can remember what peace actually sounds like. That isn't you losing hope. It's your heart becoming much harder to deceive. Perhaps this is the truth you've been searching for. They couldn't have arrived while you were still negotiating your worth. God wasn't withholding love from you. He was protecting a sacred connection from meeting the version of you that believed love had to be earned by disappearing. There was a season when you loved generously, but stayed silent about your own needs. You forgave, you waited, and you hoped people would eventually become who you needed them to be. Looking back, you can see that some of what you called unconditional love was actually fear, asking you to endure what your spirit already knew wasn't healthy. Deep inside, another belief quietly grew. If you became easier to love, quieter about your pain, and less complicated, maybe they would stay. That is a wound many chosen ones carry without ever naming it. You tell yourself you're ready for the person God is preparing. Yet when you imagine someone who is steady, kind, and emotionally available, another part of you grows uneasy. Not because you don't want that love, but because peace feels unfamiliar after years of confusing uncertainty with intimacy. Maybe you've called it trust issues or being guarded, but beneath those words is simply a heart that learned to expect disappointment before it arrived. God has never been ashamed of that wounded place. He saw every unanswered message, every compromise, and every moment you believed crumbs were enough. He saw the times you questioned your own discernment because someone else's inconsistency made you doubt yourself. That is why the waiting became mercy. The Father wasn't saying you were unworthy of love. He was refusing to build your future on the old agreement that taught you to disappear so someone else would stay. That pattern begins quietly. It starts when love feels conditional and grows until you believe being chosen requires hiding the very parts of yourself God delights in. You don't recognize it as a belief. You simply feel the pressure to be perfect, easy, grateful, and never ask for too much. But the person God sends is never coming to reward a performance. They are coming to meet the truth God has been restoring inside you. They will recognize the fruit of healing, not the mask of survival. That is why some people had to leave before this new season could begin. When those people walked away, it felt like rejection. Looking back, you may begin to see something deeper. It wasn't simply rejection. It was the Father separating you from an agreement that no longer belonged to the person you were becoming. Chosen one, you were never difficult to love. You are offering covenant depth to people whose capacity could only hold convenience. Your past doesn't prove love is dangerous. It simply reveals that your heart learned love in unsafe places. And now, the Father is teaching it a new language. This is where your freedom returns. Stop auditioning for what God has already assigned. Stop shrinking yourself before anyone asks you to. Instead, let your heart quietly declare, I will not audition for what God has prepared. I will discern it. I will receive it. I will walk in truth. That isn't pride. It is alignment. Pride builds walls, but alignment refuses to betray who God is forming just to be accepted. When the person God sends appears, you will need that alignment, because real peace often feels unfamiliar after years of emotional storms. You are no longer the person who began this waiting season. The old version of you chased every familiar echo. This version is learning to recognize what carries God's peace without forcing what only carries urgency. That is why your season is changing. There is another truth worth holding close. Revelation can bring understanding, but clarity alone does not create movement. Healing still needs time to become your natural response instead of your hopeful intention. Many chosen ones aren't lacking faith. They have prayed, forgiven, and kept believing through hidden battles. Yet when peace finally approaches, something inside still hesitates, because survival taught them to expect disappointment before hope. That is why the Father has been restoring more than your emotions. He has been restoring your ability to recognize what is truly good. Healing is not only learning to love again. It is learning to stop expecting abandonment every time something beautiful begins. So don't rush this season. Let your inner world become quiet enough to receive what God has already been preparing. Every time you choose peace over panic and truth over fear, something inside you grows stronger. The receiver is healing, the noise is fading, and little by little, chosen one, you are becoming the person who will recognize what God sends. As your heart grows quieter, another question begins to rise. Chosen one, when the person God has prepared finally enters your life, would you recognize the difference between protecting your heart and pushing away the very thing you've been praying for? Sometimes the greatest test is not whether the blessing arrives, but whether you can receive it without expecting it to become another source of pain. Long seasons of disappointment can quietly teach your heart to distrust peace. When someone steady appears, fear may still search for what must be wrong. A delayed reply can feel like rejection, and silence can sound like distance. That isn't because you're beyond healing. It's because your heart learned to prepare for loss long before it ever happened. This is why your posture matters. Arrival is not only about recognizing the promise, it is about the condition of your heart when the promise finally stands before you. A healthy posture doesn't chase or control. It remains quiet enough to listen, patient enough to let truth reveal itself, and secure enough to trust God's timing. When the one God sends begins to walk beside you, their consistency may feel unfamiliar, because your heart expected inconsistency for so long. Don't ask them to carry wounds they never created, and don't silence the discernment God has been growing within you. If peace keeps disappearing, slow down. If fear grows louder than truth, bring it before the Father. Honest faith doesn't ignore warning signs, but it also refuses to let fear become the loudest voice. Ask yourself simple questions. Does this relationship draw me closer to the Father or further from His peace? Does it produce honesty, humility, and lasting fruit? The person God sends will never require confusion to keep you close. Whatever role they carry in your life, what comes from God will always produce fruit worthy of trust. It may not arrive the way you imagined, but it will never require you to betray the peace God restored inside you. That is where the old pattern finally breaks. You stop treating every blessing like a hidden threat. You stop confusing loneliness with urgency. Instead, you stay steady, prayerful, and willing to let time reveal character. If this speaks to your heart, type peace. Let it become more than a word. Let it become a decision, a boundary, and a quiet prayer over the part of you that is learning panic was never protection. Chosen one, the person God has prepared, is already moving toward the meeting place. When they arrive, they will not meet the frightened version of you that believed love had to be earned. They will meet someone with a steadier heart, a clearer spirit, and a soul that has learned how to receive without losing itself. Now become still for a moment. Place a hand over your heart. Let your shoulders soften and return to the place where your worth was spoken long before another person ever had the chance to recognize it. Remember that you are not standing here as someone forgotten. You are standing here as someone being prepared. Picture yourself before a door you tried to force open for years. You prayed before it. You wept before it. Every time it stayed closed, you quietly wondered if God was saying no. But instead of reaching for the handle again, take one step back and stand there with the Father. Don't push. Don't bargain. Just watch. Then notice something sacred. The handle begins to turn, not from your side, but from the other side. That is often how God works. While you were healing, He was preparing. The first miracle is not always that a new door opens. Sometimes it is realizing you no longer feel the need to force it. Now imagine a long road before you. At one end, you stand with peace in your chest. At the other, something God has prepared is already moving toward you. Between those two places is healing, timing, and the holy crossing where God quietly brings prepared lives together. Let these words settle deeply. I am not late. I am being aligned. I am not forgotten. I am being prepared. I will not chase what God did not send. I will recognize what carries His peace. Let those words reach the places in your heart that still tremble. Remember this feeling, because when the person God sends finally comes, peace is what you are meant to recognize. Not panic, not obsession, not the old urgency that once felt like love. Peace doesn't mean every answer comes immediately. It means your heart stays anchored while God makes the picture clear. Chosen one, hold on to this truth. God is not sending someone to rescue the version of you that disappeared just to be loved. He is bringing someone who can walk beside the person He has been restoring in secret. You are no longer chasing every closed door. You are standing where peace has planted your feet. The Father has already spoken over your life, and His voice carries more weight than anyone else's silence. When the arrival comes, you won't need to leave this peace behind. Real love won't ask you to shrink or silence your discernment. What God sends will have room for the truth of who you are. Let this settle in your spirit. You are not waiting as someone unwanted. You are waiting as someone being aligned. Every quiet tear has been seen. Every moment you almost returned to familiar pain because it felt safer than unfamiliar peace has been seen. Still, God protected you. Some doors stayed closed because they would have become prisons. Some people left because they only knew the version of you that survived by abandoning yourself. That wasn't cruelty. It was mercy. Look honestly at your life. You are different now. The names that once consumed your thoughts have grown quiet. The approval you once chased no longer carries the same power. That quiet isn't emptiness. It's evidence that God has been changing you. You've learned something holy. Peace is not boring. Peace is sacred. When the person God sends finally stands before you, you won't need to perform, prove yourself, or earn what heaven already prepared. They are not coming to make you chosen. Chosen one, they are coming because you already are. Hear this gently, my child. I never forgot what I promised you. I wasn't only preparing what was coming, I was preparing you to receive it without losing yourself. Let those words settle where doubt once lived. You are not forgotten. You are not late. You are not too much. Release the old names, the counterfeit echoes, and the need to understand every step before trusting God with the journey. What He sends does not depend on your panic to find you. His promises know the way to a surrendered heart, so declare it again. I am not forgotten. I am not chasing. I am not begging. I am aligned. I am discerning. I am ready to receive what God sends and mature enough to release what He did not. When doubt whispers that nothing is happening, remember this. The holy crossing begins long before the visible meeting. While you heal, God is already arranging what you cannot yet see. Walk forward with open hands. Guard your heart without hardening it. Stay awake without becoming suspicious of every blessing. The person sent by God is already on their way, and you, chosen one, are already becoming the person who will recognize them when they arrive. If this message found the part of your heart that was beginning to lose hope, type "It is on its way." Then, share it with someone who has waited so long they started questioning their worth. Not so they will chase a person, but so they remember that God has never forgotten the meeting point.